This is Anytown, USA, just like your town. Here we see everyone going about their normal business. There's the Rockwell family and young Jane Rockwell. And there's Mr. Rockwell. Like many Americans, Mr. Rockwell has a secret. He's a member of a secret society who perform rituals in secret every week. Tonight, in a city, town, or small village near you, millions of men, and some women, will wear uniforms with strange occult symbols on them. The meetings will be held in utter secrecy. Only those who know the correct handshake and passwords will be allowed entry to these rituals. Ancient rituals venerating the memory of King Solomon of ancient Israel will take place. Hymns will be sung, which contain the names of gods and evil demons. Medals and swords will be awarded to members who attain the rank of knight, prince, duke, or even grand dragon. This film is about the global network of people who are members of secret societies, who, either knowingly or unknowingly, are members of the Brotherhood of the Beast.
Let it begin. The Persian Gulf is not only rich in oil, it is also rich in ancient wisdom. Long before Muhammad and the birth of Islam, Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Iran, and also Iraq were the home to thousands of mystery schools. Iraq was once the home of the Sumerian, Chaldean, and Babylonian empires. Anthropologists describe the early belief systems of Persia and Siberia as shamanism. Shamanism is the common root to all the world's greatest religions and cults. In the ancient world, long before Christians, Jews, and Muslims formed their sects in Jerusalem, there was a belief in the spirits of nature and the spirits of the stars. To ancient man, We were all spirits, inhabiting physical flesh and blood bodies. Not only did each man have a spirit, but all animals too. Even trees, mountains, and planets had spirits. In order to see these spirits in the mind's eye, mystics the world over began experimenting with various hallucinogenic plants, roots, mushrooms, vines, and flowers. Ancient peoples believed that these hallucinogenic plants were the key to unlocking a cosmic spiritual world, to be able to see the invisible, to be able to see the astral world. Shamans taught that the spirits of our ancestors and animals and plants were knowledgeable in all things. If you were ill and consulted a shaman doctor, it was the doctor who drank the potion, not the patient. The shaman doctor would then summon spirits of ancestors who would psychically look into the body of the patient. In another case, a spirit of a plant may make itself known to the shaman doctor and volunteer to be the cure. Welcome to the strange world of shamanic magic.
She read wide in a una.
Kopf Segnata, aber wohin?
Eish, shine nose codonas. Na bui deftant, ma vone vis pepe dam.
Eish, Ernest Don. Nathan Quayash Baun Wabi. Dead backside, ni fish map, baby. Shande, shande.
Aridonna, avompo.
In the Persian Gulf, a particular form of shamanism developed, which was called the working of the chariot. This form of shamanism gave birth to Judaism, which was taught at mystery schools in ancient Babylon, which is today's modern-day Iraq. Latin was, and still is, the language of the royal, political, religious elite. Spirits were conjured upon payment to the magician and summoned to give information on enemies and even cause direct harm to individuals or even an entire army. John Dee, along with other magicians and Kabbalists such as Abraham the Jew, were employed by the royal elite right across Europe. Their roles in the secret history of the royal political elite predated the present trend of employing remote viewers and clairvoyants in the CIA and Her Majesty's intelligence services. It is widely known to everyone from the CIA to the Romany fortune tellers in seaside towns across Britain that spirits know all things past, present, and future. The techniques for summoning spirits include strange vocal sounds, which were often repeated, causing the magician to get out of breath and enter an altered state of consciousness. The most famous magical text for summoning demons is called the Goetia, which instructs the magician to make howling sounds whilst calling out the names of the demons in the hierarchy of hell. In medieval Europe, the Goetia became known as the Book of Howling. Sound is one of the most important elements in magical spells. To this day, modern science cannot explain the fact that certain melodies, harmonies, and pieces of music can excite the emotions of a person. Spirits are likewise emotionally excited with certain sounds and tend to gather into a temple or house wherever particular sounds are heard. Sound can be used to increase emotions, and at Waco, Texas, and Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, sound and music have been used as a torture weapon. The sound most commonly used to summon spirits is the secret name of God, Yod-Ha-Vah-He, which has been incorrectly translated by Christians as Jehovah. Another, even more secret name for God is the Shem-Ham-Forash, which Moses recited in order to part the Red Sea. The full version of Shem-Ham-Forash has 72 letters, exactly the same number of evil spirits which are described in the most famous grimoire, the Goetia. Similarly, Buddhists and Hindus on the Indian subcontinent recite mantras in order to attract spirits. The most famous sacred sound in the Himalayas is Om, considered to be the ultimate mystic sound. Large groups of monks gather to chant the Om, and in doing so create a psychic atmosphere in the temple, as the entire building and surrounding mountains vibrate with this ancient sound. In India, there are spiritualists who claim to be able to see the shapes produced by certain sounds in the ether of space. Modern science has confirmed that each planet and star broadcasts sounds in frequencies which the human ear cannot normally detect. NASA scientists have recorded the sounds of the planets. Many of these droning and humming sounds resemble the Om mantra of India and the chanting of Jewish Kabbalists. In Alaska and Europe, there are experiments taking place which broadcast microwaves into the atmosphere, which cancel the natural vibrations of the solar system which reach planet Earth. The most famous of these projects is run by British Aerospace in Alaska at the HARP research facility. HARP uses technologies invented by Nikola Tesla. Tesla devised a transmission system which resonated the ether. Some authors claim HARP is blocking the natural vibrations and etheric energy on planet Earth and disconnecting mankind from spiritual awareness. The sounds and words used in magical spells are designed to attract specific spirits. According to British black magician Francis Barrett, who wrote a magical textbook called The Celestial Intelligencer in 1801, just repeating aloud the names of certain angels and demons was enough to make the room fill with spirits. In 1584, the magician Reginald Scott wrote his own magical grimoire text called The Discovery of Witchcraft. Reginald Scott studied one of the most famous grimoires called the Chaldean Oracles of Zoroaster, which has existed for at least 1,500 years. This ancient text contains the so-called barbarous words of evocation. These are sounds rather than identifiable words. They consist of connected syllables which have no meaning in any known language, but are written using ancient sigils or symbols which evolved from ancient Israel, Egypt, and Babylon. Reginald Scott's book is a list of names of spirits which are to be called out and chanted in a certain order. These lists of spirit names are called litanies. Many magical texts are just simple lists or litanies of the names of planets, angels, spirits, and demons. Just like a computer program is just a list of commands, so too is a magic spell for summoning spirits. Magicians chant and recite these complex lists of names whilst visualizing the magic circle being filled with spirits. Many privately owned magical textbooks were written on consecrated vellum. Often the ink was made from human blood. Some of these books were so effective at summoning spirits that merely opening the book would cause spirits to congregate and ask, "What does the master desire to know?" Many magicians believe that the ancient sigils and talisman designs representing the barbarous names of evocation are the actual vessels in which the spirits live. Alongside the spells of the grimoires, magicians are instructed to recite psalms, which are an important part of calling demons into the temple. Just by reciting psalms, calling the names of demons, and writing their name sigils in blood drawn from the magician's own hand is usually sufficient to call a spirit, angel, or demon. In the city of Angers, in northwestern France, there hangs the world's largest tapestry. The tapestry depicts the multi-headed devil in the form of a red dragon, and many scenes which illustrate the final book of the Holy Bible. The full title of this book is John's Book of the Revelation of the Apocalypse, which describes the future end of the world. It was dictated to the apostle known as John, as he lay with his head inserted into a niche in a cavern on the Greek island of Patmos. The entire book of Revelation was dictated to John by spirits. The Angers tapestry hangs in the castle once owned by the Angevin royal dynasty, who controlled thrones in France and Britain. It was in this part of France that many of the grimoires were published. The door to Angers Cathedral features sigils found in the grimoires. Many churches and cathedrals throughout Europe and Britain are actually Kabbalistic magical temples masquerading as churches. French historians claim that black masses have been performed on the altars of churches throughout Europe for centuries. In Great Britain, many churches allow their facilities to be used by Freemasons without realizing that the psalms of Freemasonry are the exact same psalms which are chanted by magicians who wrote the magical grimoires. These psalms are fundamental to the art of summoning spirits and demons. Whilst medieval witch hunts forced herbalists into hiding from the Vatican's bloodthirsty inquisitions, the royal Angevin elite in France resided in their castles, studying the intense imagery of the Revelation, where the devil is a shape-shifting, multi-headed red dragon. lot of people have asked me what the demons of the Goetia actually look like, and for the most part they appear in the mind's eye of the magician. It's very rare that you'll have a situation where a spirit or a demon will actually show itself within the magic circle or the triangle of art. It is true to say that the psyche of the magician is really the landscape in which the demons appear. And if you look at illustrations of medieval monks, you'll see that a monk's habit has a rope tied around it. Now, this is a tradition that's come from the mystery schools of Sumeria, which is Babylon, that's ancient Iraq. And really it's the Chaldean, Sumerian and Babylonian priests who are the experts in defining what we call high ceremonial magic. And what they used to do is they used to actually create a circle on the ground using a piece of cord, and this circle was really an extension of the aura of the magician, and it was a visual aid to the magician to say to the spirits, this is my domain, this is my aura, and this circle protects me from you. Now at the end of every single magical ritual, you should actually give the spirits a license to depart. And the most common form of that would be to say to the spirits, leave me now. If you've given the spirits some kind of command or instruction, you say, go forth and do my will, and please leave now. That means leave the temple, leave the ritual space, and leave me alone in good peace. Now, there is always this danger that you're going to invoke or summon a spirit or a demon, and at the end of the ritual the demon will hang around, and this is when you get spirit possession. This is when things get very, very nasty. And so what the Chaldean, Babylonian magicians used to do is they used to pick up the cord that was used to make the protective magic circle on the ground, and for extra protection for the days after the ritual had ended, they used to wrap the cord around their waists. And this is why very commonly you see illustrations of medieval monks with the long gown. That was very typical of what magicians used to wear, with a cord wrapped around their waists. Iraq, for many centuries, was the center of magical tradition in the Persian Gulf. For hundreds of years, thousands of Jewish shamans, today we call them students of the Kabbalah, studied in Fallujah, Basra and Baghdad. In the 1950s, after the formation of the State of Israel, more than 120,000 Jews emigrated from Iraq. Iraq is not only the crucible of creation, but Iraq was also the birthplace of Kabbalistic, Chaldean, and Babylonian magic. The secret teachings of the mystery schools of Baghdad eventually spread to Egypt, where centuries later the royal pharaohs would use dark mirrors to contact spirits. Iraq is now one of the Persian Gulf states, but in ancient times Iraq was known as the Kingdom of Babylon. The name Babylon means the gate of the gods. In ancient Baghdad, there once stood giant statues of bulls with human heads. This was the famous Babylon Gate, which today, like so many treasures from this ancient land, is now on display thousands of miles away in the British Museum. The so-called Babylon Gate of the Gods was not just a physical gateway, the statues represented a psychic gateway, a portal where telepathic messages could be communicated to the ancient gods of the stars. The Baghdad Museum has a collection of stone tablets and statues illustrating what these star gods looked like. They were called the Anunnaki. Just recently, thousands of ancient artifacts were looted from the Baghdad Museum, and some of these artifacts, many of them portraying the Anunnaki star gods, have been handed into the authorities, having been dumped on roadsides in the USA. Baghdad, which today is under foreign military rule, was once the global capital of magical ritual. Thus, we see in the many museums recently looted in Iraq ancient manuscripts and stone tablets which explain a technique for drawing on the ground a magic circle. This circle was considered by the magicians of ancient Iraq to be a physical representation of the aura of the human spirit. Around the circle, the Babylonian mystics would write the names of spirits which guard the 4 cardinal points of the universe. The mystic would then inscribe in the air a pentagram and stab this imaginary pentagram with a magical sword, banishing any unwanted spirits from the temple. Bait, in the form of little gifts or offerings, would be laid out on a table inside the circle, and the name of the spirit which the mystic wanted to converse with would be chanted. A piece of polished metal or glass was used to see or scry the faces of spirits. This became known as the dark mirror, and it became widely used by magicians working for the Egyptian royals, by the Oracle of Tibet, and also used to divine the most appropriate date for the coronation of Elizabeth I by her royal astrologer, Dr. John Dee. John Dee's dark mirror was recently on display at the Science Museum in London. shamanism, paganism, and Druidism from Europe, the Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf states coalesced into a form of occult science. The formulation of magical spells became popular in the Greek islands, where mystery schools dedicated to hallucinogenic plants flourished for thousands of years before the birth of Christ. Archaeologists have uncovered magical papyri written in Greek which call forth spirits to aid healing, obtaining visions of the spirit world, exorcism, the attainment of beauty and love, and the destruction of enemies. These Greek magical spells influenced magical tradition across the Holy Lands and later influenced magical texts published in medieval Europe. The names of the spirits invoked in these magical ceremonies had to be called out accurately with the correct pronunciation in order to summon the correct spirit. In other words, the magician had to be good at grammar. And these European magical spells became known as grimoires, which is an old French term for grammar. If you invoked the wrong name, then you would end up invoking perhaps an astral corpse or an imposter spirit. In the writings of Lactantius, he describes the thousands of lost spirits. They are defiled and abandoned demons who roam the face of the earth seeking comfort in destroying men. They fell everything with their tricks and strategies, their deceits and wiles. Lactantius was referring to the incredible seductive power of spirits and demons. If you perform magical ritual well, choosing a time which is most conducive astrologically and calling the names correctly, then in the mind's eye of the magician, or more alarmingly in physical plain view, perhaps in the reflections of a crystal ball, or forming a face in the smoke of sacred incense, you will eventually be confronted with the presence of a spirit.
And so, my friend, the master devised this pretty little scheme as a way of getting back a horror to the eyes of all men who seek faith using magic. It's not enough, you see, to be a spirit.
Today, some of the world's greatest libraries have collections of ancient magical manuscripts. Amongst these collections of manuscripts, there are personal diaries of several medieval magicians. Some of these manuscripts, or grimoires, describe that evil spirits, otherwise known as demons, can often first appear in a very seductive appearance. Perhaps these evil spirits will take on the shape of a small lost child. A demon may also appear as an old person or a beautiful person of either gender. A demon can change its appearance at will, and most demons actually appear as grotesque beings which combine facial and physical aspects of both humans and animals. Sometimes they resemble monsters, with aspects of humans and animals all rolled into one ugly being. If you want to see what the demons look like, then you only have to visit any of the cathedrals and churches built by the Knights Templar. They built churches and cathedrals all over Europe in the 11th, 12th and 13th centuries. So-called gargoyles are actually representations of the demon spirits described in the ancient book of Howling, otherwise known as the Goetia. So what we're doing is we're secretly filming, well, sort of fairly secretly filming. They won't allow me to film in here properly. They keep harassing me every time I bring a camera in here. And this is a cathedral in the south of France, in a place called Narbonne. And this cathedral, like many other cathedrals, was designed by the Knights Templar and sympathizers of the Knights Templar. Now we know through the confessions of the Knights Templar that they were involved in black magic, and they had idols called Baphomets. And you know, really the big joke about these cathedrals is that people pay thousands of pounds to come on pilgrimages, say from Germany or Yugoslavia or somewhere. And they pay thousands of pounds for a pilgrimage to these cathedrals in the south of France, and people think they're going to have a wonderful Christian spiritual holiday. Well, that's far from the truth. The truth of the matter is that this is a Kabbalistic temple, and it contains carvings of most of the demons that you find in ancient magical scriptures, such as the Ars Goetia, the Testament of Solomon, the Clavicule of Solomon, and many of the other magical texts that have made their way into Europe from ancient Babylon, ancient Chaldea, which is a province of Babylon, and from Sumeria as well. Now, the people that run this cathedral are basically just scamming people, because there's nothing Christian here at all. You're even hard pushed to find a crucifix. A proper crucifix has got an image of Jesus. Well, these are few and far between in this place. There's no blueprints of this cathedral in existence whatsoever. That's nothing unusual. The blueprints were usually sketched into plates of wet wax or wet clay, and then they were destroyed after the cathedrals were built. And basically this is a place which is full of carvings of devils and demons and all of the kinds of bad spirits that you find in these magical texts. And behind me you can see a very, very typical example. Now, about 3.5 years ago, this altar was uncovered. And it's full of demons, and it's full of devils, and it's full of devils eating people and all this kind of thing. And I filmed it a year ago, and unfortunately a couple of the curators saw me filming it, and they really didn't like me filming it. Now, in the year that's passed since I was here last time researching this particular cathedral, what they've gone and done is they've gone and bleached all of these demonic and devil figures, because when I was here a year ago they were painted in very gaudy oranges and yellows and blacks and reds and this kind of thing, and it really did look completely satanic and completely demonic. So what they've done in the last year is they've gone and bleached all of that paint off to try and make it sort of blend in with the rest of the cathedral. The story is that, you know, nobody knew that this altar, I call it an altar of the Black Mass, the story is that nobody knew that this altar even existed, and they were doing a bit of renovation work here, and 3.5 years ago, oh hey presto, oh we've all of a sudden found this altar which is full of demons and devils and this kind of thing. Well, the truth of the matter is this, is that many people who claim to be cardinals and priests and members of the Catholic church are actually involved in black magic, and there is such a thing as a black mass. Now the black mass is exactly the same as the Catholic mass, except everything is reversed, and instead of praising Jesus and God, they praise Satan and Lucifer. And I believe that what we've got here is we've got a typical example of one of these cathedrals that was funded and built by black magicians such as the Templars, and we've got an altar here which is where black masses would have taken place, and you see humans being eaten by demons and this kind of thing. Now we're going to have a little tour as far as we can with the curators keeping an eye on us, and I'm going to show you some of the demons which you find in typical magical texts such as the Testament of Solomon, the Clavicule of Solomon and the Ars Goetia, and you can actually find all of those demons and devils in this cathedral. Now before we go on the tour, I'm just going to show you some of the features of this actual altar, and the thing to bear in mind is that this would have been used, this altar with the statues of the demons and the devil would have been used as some kind of visual aid to a satanic priest who would have explained to people, this is what the devil looks like, these are the demons, and probably given their names. Now for the Christian congregations, who were basically illiterate peasants who would have come here, they would have probably explained away the existence of this altar by saying, this is what's going to happen to you if you don't give money to the church, you're going to go to hell and all this kind of thing. Or the other possibility is that nobody even knew that this altar to the Black Mass existed, and they may have even kept it covered up. It's not until you zoom in that you can really see how evil the whole thing is. There's all kinds of winged demons, griffins, devils. If there's any humans depicted, then they're usually depicted as being boiled or eaten, or having their limbs crushed and broken.
What about these figures up here? Are these saints, or are these...
Well, they're meant to be, but it's just basically a cover story for having this evil altar. You see griffins there, all kinds of weird things. And then, at the centre of this entire horrible altar, you've got this mouth of a monster with another monster inside, and to the left of the monster inside the mouth there's a cauldron full of people being boiled and other people, and there's people being hung as well. You may, ask yourself, what's this actually doing in a church? It's so evil. It's like a kind of medieval version of a Hammer House of Horror movie. There's a cartload of people that are going to be probably eaten or killed in some horrible fashion. And it's important to remember that the Knights Templar were very, very much involved in the design of these kinds of cathedrals, and it's no wonder that guilds of Freemasons were formed, and they secretly worked on these buildings and then destroyed all of the blueprints. But all the paint, as you can see behind, it was painted in very, very gaudy colours, and what's happened in the year since I was here last is that all that paint's been bleached off to try and make it blend in with the rest of the cathedral, I suppose in order to stop people like me from asking awkward questions. Now the cover story is that you've got, some kind of Mary and Jesus figure standing on top of the devil. But as far as I'm concerned, it's strange that this altar was covered up and not known about up until 3.5 years ago. All this says, there's no information about why there's devils here and this kind of thing. It just says that every Saturday you can come and sit in front of these demonic figures and these demonic statues, and you can make cross signs over your forehead and your chest, and you can think that you're sitting inside a Christian church. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. Why, out of all of these individual chapels in this gigantic cathedral, have they chosen this particular demonic kind of altar to have all of the Christian ceremonies? And the interesting thing is that right behind, and I'll just go over there, is that we have some very, very interesting skull and crossbones iconography. I don't think that's very Christian at all. The expressions on these monks, if indeed they are monks, I believe that they could be Knights Templar. As you can see, their expressions are very, very strange. They're passing on some kind of information to each other, or they're being given information, and the information they're being given is not to their liking. And there's some more of them here. These are very, very sort of demonic, nasty looking kind of monk figures. And they don't look happy at all. So you've got 6 very elaborate carvings there. Not a single one of these figures is happy. Now, to the left of these 6 rather dissatisfied, nasty looking monks, if that's indeed what they are, they look like black magicians to me, is that you have this even more scary face, which is passed off as being a cherub. Well, that's not a cherub at all. In the Ars Goetia, that's known as Volvac or Volak, and it's a demon spirit that appears as a child who usually rides on the back of a winged serpent or a winged griffin or a winged dragon. And as you can see, that is not the happy face of a cherub. It's been deliberately carved as an evil face, and in the left hand pupil you can see that very clearly. And you say, well, where's the dragon? If that's meant to be Volak or Volvac from the Goetia, where's the dragon? Well, the dragon is right here, and there's 2 of them in symmetry. So that does not fit into the idea of an angel or a cherub. It's very, very demonic, and that sits on top of a plaque which has very, very serious and nasty skull and bones iconography. But there's larger griffins and dragons and larger sort of strange composite creatures which resemble the creatures which are described in ancient magical texts elsewhere in this cathedral. So let's take a look at them. Creature which is described in the Goetia. The feet of some character who's meant to be some pious contributor to the church. And the curators really don't like me pointing out this kind of thing, but that's obviously not a dog. It's some demonic creature. And it's very, very typical of the kinds of things that you see described in the Ars Goetia. This is another example of the kinds of demonic things that are slipped in and unnoticed in all of these so-called Christian places. There's a kind of decapitated head. It's a deformed, strange head in one of these tapestries. Of course, that goes completely unnoticed by most people that come here.
Ladies and gentlemen, the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
JFK was the last truly popular president of the United States of America. Assassination is used to adjust the outcomes of elections. Lee Harvey Oswald is innocent. Lee Harvey Oswald deserves to be pardoned posthumously, and the reason for that is because there are photographs of Lee Harvey Oswald standing in the crowd watching JFK's cavalcade go by. Because of these photos, it is obvious that Lee Harvey Oswald was framed. There's no way that he could have been in the book depository, and Lee Harvey Oswald was a stand-byer. He was just in the crowd, and he watched the motorcade go by, so there's no way that he could have actually played any part whatsoever in the actual firing of the shots that killed JFK.
As President Kennedy's motorcade left the center of Dallas, where President Kennedy was shot today from an ambush.
We see Jackie Kennedy leap to the back of the car, and what she's doing, she's trying to collect and save parts of her husband's brain. The bullets came from at least 2 different directions, and analysis of the famous footage filmed by Mr. Zapruder actually shows the trails, the condensation trails of at least one of the bullets. And the bullets came in from 2 different angles, which means that there must have been a minimum of 2 assassins. The leader of the FBI at the time of the Kennedy assassination was J. Edgar Hoover. J. Edgar Hoover was a cross-dresser. He was a very strange man with a lot of secrets. J. Edgar Hoover was in charge of the FBI, and when you join the FBI, one of the first lessons that you learn when you investigate a crime is to ask, who benefits from that crime? Well, the person that benefited the most from the JFK assassination was Lyndon B. Johnson. Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in very, very quickly. In actual fact, one of the witnesses was Jackie Kennedy, and Jackie Kennedy stood there as a witness, and she still had parts of her husband's brain splattered over her clothes. Lyndon B. Johnson therefore became an unelected president of the United States of America. What we saw from that moment onwards is that he stepped up US military activities not only in Vietnam but all over the world. That's a trend which continues to this day. Lyndon B. Johnson was a pervert. He used to ask White House security people to telephone young secretaries in the middle of the night pretending that he had dictation. Now we know this because there was a tape recorder installed in one of the drawers inside the presidential desk at the Oval Office, and I've got those tapes, and you can hear Lyndon B. Johnson doing most of his presidential duties on the telephone. And the reason that he preferred the telephone is because he didn't want anything written down.
I want the 5 smartest, best educated, fastest, prettiest secretaries in Washington. I don't want any old, broken down old maids. I want them from 25 to 40. I want them that can work Saturday and Sunday. Right. I want them that can work at night, not be afraid to go home after the Secret Service takes them out of the gate. I want them to have a college degree if it's at all possible, and be able to keep secrets. And I've got to have some people that I can trust.
Oh,
Where are you?
I'm at home. Who's this?
This is the president.
Oh.
What are you doing?
Oh, I think someone's playing with me.
No, you know, I want to talk to you about our work, honey. Where are you at home?
Oh, yes, I am.
Are you busy?
No, I'm not.
Can you come down here immediately?
Oh, I'll be glad to.
Come down. I've got Jack Valenti here, and we want to talk to you about a little reassignment. Raj was speaking.
This is Jack Valenti speaking.
Yes, sir.
Would you send a car to pick up Miss Whittington?
Miss Whittington?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Let's look at Northern California. You understand?
Yeah.
You know what's happening in San Francisco.
San Francisco's just gone.
It's
Clear over.
I understand, but it isn't just down in the ratty part of town. But the upper class in San Francisco is that way. The Bohemian Grove that I attend, one time at a time, the Easterners and the others that come there. But it is the most faggy goddamn thing you will ever imagine in San Francisco crowd because it's just terrible. I mean, I don't want to shake hands with anybody in San Francisco.
Now, lots of people have seen documentaries made by a Christian chap in America called Alex Jones, and Alex has been quite courageous, and he's just literally walked into this place in Northern California. It's called Bohemian Grove, and it's a private estate which is actually run by the Bohemian Club, which has been established for a very, very long time in San Francisco. That's where their headquarters are. And it's a bit of a strange place. They invite people like the former Prime Minister of Britain, John Major, the Grey Man, to give lakeside talks and speeches, and they've had, you know, former chancellors of Germany, and they have the bosses of Fortune 500 corporations giving speeches, and there's even been the odd speech by astronauts. Now, that doesn't sound too strange until you then realize that these speeches are by the side of a lake, and on the other side of the lake there is this stone, cement and metal, and I think parts of it are made out of fiberglass, statue of an owl. Now, the owl has been used as a symbol in the past by, say for example, the Bavarian Illuminati, and it's also been used by other covens and other sort of esoteric and occult groups throughout history. And when you joined the Bavarian Illuminati, you were actually put into a school with other people that had just joined, and the pupils, the new adepts, the novices, they were called Minervals, and the Bavarian Illuminati actually divided their new members into churches, and they were called the Churches of the Minervals. And their logo, or their symbol, was an owl, and that owl comes from the ancient Mediterranean, from the mystery schools that were on Crete and Cyprus and other islands in the Mediterranean. And they also used the owl symbol, and the owl has become known as the Owl of Minerva. And in actual fact, there's an entire area in the south of France, bordering the Mediterranean Sea, where there are many, many castles built by Gnostic sects like the Cathars. They were basically running their own form of a kind of Gnostic church or an occult church, and this entire area of France is called the Minervois. And the owl, which we see on the other side of the lake from where these lectures are given at Bohemian Grove, is the owl of Minerva. There is a small altar at the base of the owl, and on that altar we see an ever-burning flame, an everlasting flame. And that flame is coming from an Aladdin's lamp. And that is not Aladdin's lamp from the fairy tale. It is, in actual fact, an effigy of the brass vessel that was used by King Solomon to entrap the demons that are described in the Goetia. Now, where else do we see a cult using this Aladdin's lamp? Well, we see it at Yale University. We see it inside the headquarters of the Skull and Bones. And the Skull and Bones is a fraternity. It's a sort of pseudo-Germanic offshoot of the Bavarian Illuminati that was set up in the 1800s. And there was a break-in by a sort of fake fraternity that was set up called the Order of the File and Claw. That's a file and a crowbar. And they set up their fake fraternity just literally to break into the headquarters of the Skull and Bones. And this has happened twice, and there are actually photographs of people from the File and Claw, and in more recent times another group that actually managed to break their way through a window and get inside the headquarters of the Skull and Bones. And there again we find that the Skull and Bones also have a everlasting flame in the form of the classic Aladdin's lamp. And these are signs that we are dealing with fraternities, covens, occult groups who very, very much understand the significance of the Goetia, and they very, very much understand the power of these demons. And the fact that you've got the Aladdin's lamp being used by Skull and Bones and the Aladdin's lamp being used by the Bohemian Club at Bohemian Grove shows that there is a demonic aspect to what these groups are interested in. Yes, they have interesting speeches by politicians which are, for the most part, fairly innocuous, anemic, and don't really harm anyone, but I can tell you now that there is a darker aspect, higher secrets within these groups, and they are linked to the ancient legends of King Solomon and the Goetia. At Yale University, home to the secret society known as the Skull and Bones, which has initiated several vice presidents, senators, and presidents, there is an ancient manuscript written completely in cipher. This manuscript has never been publicly translated. It was acquired by Yale from a book trader called Wilfred Voynich, and has become known as the Voynich manuscript. This handwritten, highly detailed manuscript was discovered by Wilfred Voynich at Villa Mondrigoni near Frascati, south of Rome, more than 100 years ago. Villa Mondrigoni means the house of the world of dragons. Villa Mondrigoni was a training college for Jesuits. The most famous Jesuit of all time was Ignatius Loyola, whose secret society was the first to use the name Illuminati. The secret discipline of the Jesuit secret societies inspired Heinrich Himmler to form his own SS, Cult of the Black Sun. Adam Weishaupt was a Jesuit, and he formed the Bavarian Illuminati secret society based on the secret teachings of Jesuits in the 1700s. Like many buildings owned by secret societies and institutions of the royal political elite, Villa Mondrigioni has a garden filled with statues of reptilian creatures. Villa Mondrigioni was recently filmed by the BBC for a documentary about the Voynich manuscript. Wilfred Voynich acquired the manuscript and took it back to his shop in Shaftesbury Avenue in central London. He placed a price tag of $165,000 on the manuscript, which was full of diagrams of herbs, flowers, and vines. It is patently clear to anyone who has studied magic that the Voynich manuscript is actually a book of magical spells, incantations, magical astrology, cosmology, and herbology. Many drawings in the Voynich manuscript feature hallucinogenic plants, such as the blue lily of the Nile, which has been confirmed by Professor Andrew Sherratt of Sheffield University as containing hallucinogenic alkaloids which create a feeling similar to modern-day ecstasy or MDMA. The Voynich manuscript has drawings of naked women standing and laying in pools of water with tube-like structures around them. These women are more than likely oracles, laying and standing in pools in underground caverns. Other diagrams in the Voynich manuscript show how to place a goat in the center of a magic circle and transform its spirit into the evil goat of Mendes, one of the ancient apparitions associated with the devil himself. The Voynich manuscript is a magical textbook with drawings of hallucinogenic plants and tube or trumpet-shaped apparatus. In spiritualism, it is very common that whispers from spirits are amplified using what is known as a spirit trumpet. At various underground oracle temples, crowds would sit around openings carved into the rock and listen to the amplified whispers of the oracle sitting deep within the temple.
I invite you to drink the healing water and ride horses for all time together. Let's not hide what we have heard, and let's keep what we have found.
The Voynich manuscript is written entirely in cipher, and there are only 3 manuscripts written entirely in code prior to the year 1500. The Voynich manuscript is one of them. Many words in the manuscript repeat, and this is a sure sign that the manuscript contains spells, as magical incantations often repeat the same word many times. At the corner of each page of the Voynich manuscript, page numbers have been added, and the handwriting has been matched to that of Elizabethan magician Dr. John Dee and psychic medium Edward Kelly. The Voynich manuscript is perhaps the most important magical text of its age, dating from before the 15th century. It is now in the custody of the Beinecke Library at Yale University, who strictly forbid public access to the Voynich manuscript. When the BBC recently made a program and radio show about the manuscript, they were prevented from removing the manuscript from the room, and the curator refused to utter even a single word. Clearly, the Voynich manuscript is a magical grimoire, part of a corpus of magical works which were codenamed the Holy Grail in the 12th and 13th centuries. According to a letter found inside the Voynich manuscript, it had previously been owned by Emperor Rudolf in Prague, who had employed Dr. John Dee and Edward Kelly to conjure spirits for the royal political elite. The British Library, the Louvre in Paris, and even the Royal Collection of the British Royal Family all have similar grimoire texts in their vaults. Most of the original grimoire texts, almost without exception, were written in Arabic and Hebrew. Before the Kabbalah became popular in 13th century Europe, there existed in ancient Israel a form of Jewish shamanic magic known as Mahaseh Merkava, the working of the chariot. Many of the grimoire texts explain the techniques for summoning demons and even how to invoke the spirits of planets into the magician's magic circle. The original texts are based on knowledge from before the time of the pharaohs. The Catholic Church formed the Inquisitions in order to control the distribution of this occult knowledge. In Umberto Eco's book, The Name of the Rose, he tells of how medieval monks poisoned each other in order to keep certain ancient texts secret.
Someone was at great pains to conceal a secret of the first magnitude. The calligraphy is without question left-handed. And the only left-handed member of your community is, or rather was, Brother Berenger, the assistant librarian. Now, what kind of secret knowledge would he have been privy to?
I have the feeling that you're about to tell me.
Books, restricted books, spiritually dangerous books.
Most of the well-known grimoires are said to have been written, or at least commissioned, by King Solomon of Israel. Under Jewish law, it is forbidden for anyone under the age of 40 years to study the Kabbalah. However, during the medieval era, a rabbi teaching Kabbalistic studies in Narbonne in the south of France introduced the grimoires to a French aristocrat called Hugh de Champagne. And previously, secret Hebrew books of magic were translated into Latin and passed into the hands of non-Jews for the first time. Hugh de Champagne began demonstrating how to contact demons for European aristocrats. Rumours of occult rituals at the heart of the European aristocracy spread far and wide, and so romantic novels were distributed which confused public knowledge, blurring fact with fiction. These fictional accounts became known as Grail romances, and the grimoire texts were codenamed the Holy Grail. Many of the original grimoires were written on papyrus with a quill feather pen which had been plucked from a cockerel which had been sacrificed at dawn. The ink was often made from red wine, which had been consecrated at a special ceremony. The sheets of papyrus eventually made their way into the modern world, being traded by magi from the Holy Lands who traded hallucinogenic mushrooms in the Adriatic. These ancient magical texts contained astrological star maps of the heavens, described the characteristics of the stars and planets, and contained exact instructions on how to summon a spirit, angel, or demon. These spirits could be seen in the reflections of a crystal ball. When the tomb of French King Childeric was uncovered in 1653, a crystal ball was found inside, along with several dozen golden models of honeybees. Napoleon Bonaparte had these golden bees stitched onto his coronation robe. Still, to this day, the bee and the beehive are symbols of the Illuminati global network of secret societies. Once translated into Greek and Latin, these magical papyrus were bound into books and became known as the grimoires. The translators of these magical instructions for summoning spirits were often priests, bishops, and even popes working at the Vatican Library. Outside the hallowed walls of the Vatican, peasants were burnt alive for being interested in magic, whilst within the private reading rooms and cloisters of churches and royal palaces, magicians such as John Dee were busy at work employing the knowledge of the grimoires to contact spirits, plan wars, and inflict psychic attack on the enemies of the state. In the 1700s, the century which saw the birth of Adam Weishaupt's Illuminati secret society flourished throughout Europe, a new grimoire was published. It has become known as the Grand Grimoire of the Red Dragon. Just as we see in the tapestry of Angers, the Red Dragon is a symbolic representation of the spirit of the devil. First written by Antony, the Jewish rabbi of Venice, the Grand Grimoire of the Red Dragon is a book of black arts, which is a synthesis of previously oral, very secret teachings handed down from one rabbi to the other. the Red Dragon Grimoire is almost exclusively dedicated to instructing rabbis on how to invoke demonic forces. Rabbi Antonio de Veneziana claims the book was originally written by King Solomon, who is also credited with having written the Goetia, which describes how to summon any one or all of 72 demons in the hierarchy of hell. The Grimoire of the Red Dragon gives distinct instructions on how to make a pact with Satan. The text shows rabbis how to summon the spirit of a demonic spirit called Lucifuge Rufakal, who is none other than the Prime Minister of Hell.
Hayat Nevet, and Emet Nevet, Jedefuet F, Awet F, Aset, Semawu M Sa Nuit.
Many authors believe that the pact with the Prime Minister of Hell was originally devised in texts written or commissioned by King Solomon, and it was, up until the making of this film, one of the closest guarded secrets of the Hebrew Kabbalists. During the 1700s, the Grimoire of the Red Dragon was avidly read by the elite of Europe and the Americas. Many magicians and rabbis were hired in order to make pacts with the devil and Lucifuge Rufakal. The Grimoire of the Red Dragon indicates that if you serve the devil, then the rabbis following the rules of the pact will be rewarded with knowledge of where buried treasure can be found. This treasure is obviously symbolic. The Grimoire of the Red Dragon inspired the stories of Dr. Faustus, who was actually a real historical character. Dr. Faustus was a paedophile magician who used children in black magic sex rituals. Dr. Faustus had patrons amongst the royalty and nobility of Europe. In the year 1509, a German magician, Henry Cornelius Agrippa, wrote 3 books of occult philosophy. He explains the importance of interacting with the spirit of the earth. He explores the techniques of the Kabbalah, sacred geometry, spirit divination, and then describes how to have psychic, telepathic conversations with angels. Through the publication of his 3 books of occult philosophy, Henry Cornelius Agrippa became a favored magician at the royal courts of Europe. In his writings, Agrippa summarizes his duties to the royal elite of Europe when he wrote, "My task is to summon spirits who will defend kingdoms, discover the secret knowledge of men, to increase riches, to foretell future events, and to see and know things done in many miles off." By the 1500s, the magical texts of Arabia and the Kabbalah were in the hands of magicians advising the royal court of England. Elizabethan magician and spy John Dee was born in 1527. John Dee wrote many diaries listing the rituals and ceremonies which he performed in order to have conversations with angels and demons. John Dee was astrologer royal to Queen Elizabeth I and used the same magical grimoire texts as the Knights Templar. Dee kept a giant library of occult books which originated in ancient Babylon and Egypt. Between 1581 and 1583, John Dee wrote 5 books of mysteries. These are now preserved at the British Museum. John Dee's mystery books are concerned with a special system of magic known as heptarchia, and how to contact the 7 archangels who stand before the throne of God. Each archangel is actually one of the 7 known planets, with each planetary angelic spirit having its own 7 subdivisions. John Dee designed what he called a holy table, onto which he mapped the angelic names and the 7 subdivisions of the astral planes on each planet of the known solar system. A special talisman rests at the center of Dee's holy table, which contains the stylized names of spirits. This wax tablet is called the Sigillum Dei Ameth, which is Latin for seal of truth. Upon the wax sigil tablet, Dee placed a glass prism or crystal ball, so that visions of the angelic planetary spirits could actually be seen. The spirits dictated immense amounts of information to John Dee and his psychic collaborator Edward Kelly. Edward Kelly was a psychic medium, and the two of them engaged in reanimating dead corpses, a form of magic known as necromancy, and they attempted to transmute metals into gold, an ancient magical art called alchemy. 2 entire books of spirit messages were dictated to Dee and Kelly, called the Book of Logeth and the Book of the Speech from God. The spirits spoke in a strange language which John Dee called Enochian. The spirits told Dee the magical sounds and words by which God himself created the universe. Between May the 28th, 1583 and September the 7th, 1607, John Dee and Edward Kelly started to receive very specific information from spirits, which included instructions on how to build a great table of the earth. This occult device was used in conjunction with specific magical sounds known as keys, which summoned spirits to Dee and Kelly. The spirits explained that planet Earth was divided into 48 regions, and each region was governed by a planetary spirit. John Dee informed his employer, Queen Elizabeth I, that any country of the world could be placed under their command simply by invoking the spirit which resided in that particular part of the world. The royal political elite, such as Emperor Rudolph, and Elizabeth I employed John Dee to summon the spirits. According to John Dee, the spirits summoned using the grimoire texts recommended creating a new world order, where the armies and navy of Great Britain were sent out to conquer the Americas, India, Southeast Asia, and Australasia. It is true to say that the global superstate now planned by the United Nations, European Union government, otherwise known as the New World Order, is a plan which was inspired by demons and spirits originally conjured in the Elizabethan era by Dr. John Dee. John Dee wrote a manifesto for world domination, which became the single goal of the elite, a plan to enslave the world into a psychic dictatorship and to create a single one-world government ruled from Britain using magic.